I have visited Newport to get a passport. You have to wait a while it is produced, so I had a wander round. I'm interested in architecture and planning, and I thought there were some interesting buildings there. I had visited the famous Transporter Bridge before, but there are other good bridges across the mighty River Usk, which flows right through the city and has been at the heart of its prosperity. Then I read the piece about the city by Jones the Planner in his book Towns in Britain, and this pointed me in the direction of more buildings and a wealth of public art, which I have explored to put together this slideshow. There are several places called Newport around the globe. This is the one in South Wales, which is one of the Principality's largest urban centres. The castle seems like the place to begin. Now only the East Range survives of this once important structure that controlled the crossing of the River Usk. The present bridge dates to 1927. A temporary bridge had to be built next to it during its construction, as it was then the only crossing point in the town. Bridge construction on the Usk has always been difficult, as the tidal range is the largest within an urban area anywhere in the world. Now, of course, the castle is sandwiched in between the road and railway bridges. The town grew up on the west bank of the Usk, and most of the buildings I want to visit are on this side of the river. But first I want to take a diversion across the bridge along Clarence Place. About 200 yards from the bridge on the left is Neon, a community cinema project housed in the finest surviving Art Deco cinema in South Wales. Dating from 1938, it borrows from German and Dutch styles of brickwork with elaborate fins and rounded corners, while to the left of the entrance is an extensive panel of buff and black tiles. Originally an Odeon, Odeon's house architect Harry Weedon is usually credited with the design, but he held an executive position and Arthur Price was the job architect. Opposite, at the end of Clarence Place, is the cenotaph of 1923, designed by Cyril Bates and Colin Jones, based on Lutyens' design for Whitehall. Retracing our steps towards the bridge, we reach the elegant building of the former Newport Technical Institute. This is Edwardian Baroque from 1910, mainly of brick with stone facings, crowned by a copper dome above the entrance on the corner. It plays a key role in the townscape of this part of Newport, terminating the Clarence Street frontage and acting as a gateway feature when viewed from the western end of the bridge. Pleasure boats once moored at the adjacent wharf. As we recross the bridge, we can see in front of us Peter Fink's steel wave sculpture of 1991, representing steel and sea trades. Looking left, we get a panorama across the river, which includes the dramatic footbridge, the riverfront theatre, the university buildings, and, in the distance, the George Street Bridge and the arc of the City Bridge can just be glimpsed. We will look at them in more detail in a minute. Below the roundabout is the old green mural, which celebrates the Monmouthshire Railway and Canal Company. First the canal and then the railway played a key role in the prosperity of Newport in the 19th century. It was produced by Kenneth Budd in 1975. He also created a much-loved mural celebrating the Chartist uprising of 1839. This was controversially demolished in 2013 to make way for the Friars Walk shopping centre after Cadw decided not to list it. Turning left and standing by the steel wave, we are now presented with a daunting dual carriageway running parallel to the river, which, together with its slip roads, consists of a total of 8 lanes of busy traffic. Beyond it is the bus station, and beyond that, still managing to hold its own, is the spire of the market hall. It has been argued that Usk Way, as the dual carriageway is called, is a missed opportunity, cutting off the city centre from the riverfront. However, this has always been the case. Before the road there was the railway serving the docks, and before that the canal running alongside the river. And construction of the road has enabled the pedestrianisation of sections of Commercial Street, connecting it to the Friars Walk shopping centre. The 20-mile-an-hour speed limit makes it less daunting, but it is still very busy. Some important modern structures have located in the corridor between Usk Way and the river. First is the appropriately named Riverfront Theatre and Arts Centre, opened in 2004. Designed by Austin Smith Lord in a deconstructivist style reminiscent of Zaha Hadid or Frank Gehry. It won Welsh Building of the Year in both 2005 and 2006 and contains a 482-seat theatre, studios and workshops. It was while excavating the orchestra pit for the theatre that the Newport boat was discovered, the important remains of a late medieval ship which met its end in Newport. A wide promenade runs alongside the river, and a little further down we come to the futuristic Newport City footbridge. This cable-stayed bridge with off-centre supports was designed by Nicholas Grimshaw and opened in 2006. Just beyond this is the Newport campus of the University of South Wales, designed by BDP and forming another major part of the regeneration of the city centre. From here we can see the George Street Bridge. Opened in 1964, it was the first cable-stayed bridge in the United Kingdom. It was only the third road crossing of the city, and the A48 was routed over it. Later, with the opening of the City Bridge in 2004, that became the route of the A48. This elegant bowstring construction makes a worthy addition to the collection of distinctive river crossings that add a definite presence to the cityscape. Now we will return up the riverside to the market hall, stopping first to admire the fine brickwork on the buildings to its left. The market hall is an impressive building opened in 1889 and designed in the French Renaissance style, which forms an important part of the cityscape with its landmark spire. This replaced an earlier building which had extended the market from its original site on High Street. It has now been refurbished and claims to be Europe's biggest indoor market regeneration. This leads us through to High Street, where there are a couple of buildings of particular note. On the west side is the Newport Arcade, almost opposite the back entrance of the market. It dates from 1893 and was part of a large-scale redevelopment of the High Street in the 1890s, presumably drawing inspiration from the arcades of Cardiff. A little further down is the Murenga House, a half-timbered pub said to have 16th or 17th century origins. The original house was demolished in 1816, and this structure may originally date from then, but has been altered subsequently. A Murenga was an official who collected taxes for the upkeep of the town walls, derived from the French mur, wall. Further up, the former post office building has been incorporated into a modern office development and car park. Cutting through to the left, we come to another dual carriageway, Queensway, the other side of which is the tall neo-Georgian facade of the station. Turning left again, we pass the open-sided platforms to reach Nicholas Grimshaw's new station building, a snake-like metal-coated structure crossing the lines to access the platforms from above. Beyond this, the tower of the civic centre comes into view, rising up like a citadel on the hill. A monument to civic pride or a forbidding fortress? I think the former. It was designed by Nottingham architect T.C. Howitt in 1937 in a modern classical style that was reminiscent of similar buildings in Swansea and Southampton. War damage meant that it was not finished until the 1960s, by which time it had fallen out of fashion. However, it is definitely worth a visit for the fine murals in the grand stairwell. These were executed by German painter Hans Freibusch, assisted by Phyllis Bray, and depict scenes from the history of Newport and the surrounding area in a vivid neo-realist style. Owen Hatherley describes them as the most incredible public artworks of any building of 20th century Wales. I was reminded of Diego Rivera's epic murals in Mexico City. We returned to the city centre along Bridge Street, past the site of the Lyceum Theatre, a wonderful Greek temple demolished in 1961 and replaced by a travel lodge. Bridge Street takes us to the heart of the city, where High Street, Skinner Street, Commercial Street, Stow Hill and Bridge Street all meet. As one of the most important intersections in the city, it is a pity that it was not possible to completely pedestrianise the area, but the paving of Commercial Street and the bottom end of Bridge Street creates some sort of public space. Here stands the imposing presence of the Westgate Hotel. There has been a hotel on this site since 1709, but the present building dates from 1887. It was designed by E. A. Lansdowne in a French Renaissance style, built of pennant stone with Bathstone dressings, with large yellow brick chimneys. Inside, the elaborate main staircase and richly decorated public rooms are particularly complete and amongst the best surviving of their period. In 1839, the earlier hotel was the site of one of the most important events in Newport's history, when a Chartist rising of several thousand people, led by local activist and former Mayor John Frost, advanced on the Westgate Hotel, attempting to free some of their number who had been arrested and brought there. Some of the protesters were armed. Fighting ensued, and soldiers stationed in the building were ready for them and fired on the crowd, killing probably upwards of 20 of them. In the pedestrianised area outside the hotel is a monument to the Chartists, and they are commemorated in several other spots, as we shall see. Opposite the Westgate Hotel are some very good shop buildings. The whole block between Skinner Street and Corn Street was redeveloped in a French Gothic style in 1892-4 to a design by A. Swash. In the 1930s, numbers 9 to 12 were redeveloped in an Art Deco style, leaving number 13 on the end untouched. Naturally, the altered street frontage does not match the quality of the good facades above. From the back of the Westgate Hotel, we begin our ascent of Stow Hill, one of Newport's most important streets, which connected, as it still does, the city centre to St Woolos. On the left, St Mary's Roman Catholic Church is Victorian Gothic in the early English style, by J. J. Scholes, and dates from 1838-40. Opposite, wrapped in scaffolding, is the Bethel Community Church. The oldest part is the classical frontage of 1863 by local architects Habershon and Pite. In 1884, a new Victorian Gothic church was added, which is now the dominant part of the group with its lofty spire. This was designed by Habershon and Faulkner. It subsequently became a nightclub before once again becoming a place of worship. It was gutted by fire in 2018 and is now undergoing a restoration which will transform the interior into a space for worship more in tune with modern needs. Further up on the left is the fine ensemble of Victoria Place, two three-storey stuccoed terraces of 1844, framing views of the fine former Congregational Chapel of 1859, which is now a mosque. As we near the top of the hill, a gap in the frontage to the left reveals a panorama over the levels with the transporter bridge centre stage. Opposite, a blue plaque on the cathedral's boundary wall shows that this marked the boundary of the town until 1835. At the top of the hill we arrive at St Woolos Cathedral, the mother church of the Diocese of Monmouth. It became a cathedral in 1949, and its development from the 6th to the 20th century makes it one of the most interesting churches in Wales. St Woolos found a white ox with a black spot on its forehead, which told him that this was the site on which to build a church. For most of its life, the church was on its hill outside the town, only being incorporated into it in the 19th century. It is normally approached from the west, passing a plaque commemorating the Chartist Rising, 10 of whose victims were buried in the churchyard. The tower is perpendicular and dates from the 15th century. St Mary's Chapel links the entrance to the main body of the church and is the site of the original church, probably founded about 500 AD as a wooden structure. The present building has been much restored. It contains the font, a splendid Victorian reconstruction of a Romanesque original based on a surviving fragment. The entrance into the nave is through a wonderful 12th century Romanesque arch. This contains fragments of paint and was probably fully painted originally. The supporting columns are believed to be Roman, possibly brought from Caerleon as part of a shrine to St Woolos. The nave arcades are also Romanesque. The round windows above them would have originally let in daylight, but became enclosed when the aisle roofs were rebuilt in the 15th century. The chancel was rebuilt between 1960 and 1964 to a design by Alban Caro, which harmonises well with the rest of the church. At the east end is a round window enclosed in a mural by John Piper and Patrick Raintians. The modern crucifixion figure is by Singaporean artist Tay Swee Seong. From the west end of the cathedral, Friars Road takes us down to Bellevue Park. This was opened in 1894 on land donated by Lord Tredegar to a design by Thomas Hayden Mawson. It is a good example of an intact 19th century park and contains a listed pavilion and conservatories, a rustic tea house, terracing, park lodges, entrance gates and boundary walls. As we return past the cathedral towards the city centre, we descend Stowe Hill as the Chartist protesters did in 1839, heading for the Westgate Hotel. On our left, just before the red brick Victorian school building, we see two plaques on the wall, each containing models of tiny shoes. These were part of a project initiated by the cathedral in 2017 called In Our Footsteps, to mark the Chartist movement. The right-hand panel also records other locations around the world which have been the scenes of uprisings. There are other similar plaques elsewhere in the town. Exploration of the buildings I have visited so far could be done on foot, but now I want to visit some outlying buildings where this would be impractical. The A48 leads to the southwest of the town, where we encounter three developments of note. First is Tredegar House, the seat of the Morgan family, later the Lords Tredegar, from the 15th century to the mid-20th century, and now managed by the National Trust on behalf of the City Council. The present house dates from 1672 with some 19th century remodelling and is regarded as one of the finest restoration houses in Britain. Nearby, on land originally owned by the Tredegar estate, is Newport Wafer Fab, who make semiconductors. The site contains one of Richard Rogers' best early buildings for the company, then known as Inmos. Dating from 1982, it sports his characteristic high-tech structure. Being within a security-protected site, it is not possible to see at close quarters. Next to it is the innovative Dufferin housing estate. This was designed by Richard McCormack and completed in 1978. The houses form a virtually continuous snake of 2 stories, punctuated only to give access to the large central open space. They wriggle around a series of cul-de-sacs, which allow the central open space to be completely car-free. Within this open space is a primary school and a large block of woodland. The development has an attractive woodland setting. The majority of the estate is heated from a central boiler house. Finally, we conclude our visit at Newport's most iconic structure, the Transporter Bridge. A transporter bridge is basically a ferry suspended on a bridge. It was constructed between 1902 and 1906 to provide better access to industry on the east side of the river than the ferry, which was difficult to operate in the vast tidal range of the Usk estuary. However, use of the river by tall-masted ships demanded a lofty structure or a much more expensive tunnel. A transporter bridge would be high enough without requiring extensive approach ramps to raise a permanent structure to the height required. It was jointly designed by borough engineer Robert Haynes and Frenchman Ferdinand Arnaudin, who had previously built such bridges at Marseille and Portugalete near Bilbao. Newport's design is very similar to the Pont Transporteur in Marseille, destroyed during World War II. It is a lofty, elegant structure, regarded as the better of the 2 surviving examples in the UK still operational, the other being in Middlesbrough. The gondola is also an elegant structure, reminiscent of an early pier pavilion in blue. The other bridges in the city have now rendered this bridge redundant as an active road link, but it is still open to visitors. The visitor centre was being refurbished when I visited, and well worth a visit, as it is one of only 8 such bridges in the world still operational, from a total of 20 or so constructed. As one of Wales's largest cities, Newport has managed to punch above its weight in terms of architecture compared to similar cities in England, and has much to interest the student of the built environment. It is also notable for its collection of public art in many different guises. I have found making this video a fascinating and enjoyable experience.